Hey, everybody. It's me, Danielle. A little different today. We're doing a little bit of a podcast here. So, a little bit of background. This is Megan. She was my student a while ago. We're going to really get to know her today. But I brought her in to do a podcast because she actually reached out to me first. And after taking the class and working in the field for a while, she really felt like, hey, I have something that I want to share with your students. And so, I invited her into a current, like, in person EMT class and said, talk to us about your experience. And she did an amazing job. And I said, that's so cool. I can't wait to have you back again. And that's when she broke my heart and told me that she's moving out of state. So we're going to do our best to try to capture kind of the essence of what she told us about in class. And hopefully, this is both of our first time doing a podcast, your first podcast too.
Yeah, it
So
is.
I don't know. We'll do the best we can. I have some questions prepared and hopefully this will be enjoyable for you all to watch. Um, so yeah, Megan took my EMT class in 2021, and it's currently it's March of 2025. And tell us a little bit about like your EMT work experience since finishing the class 4 or 5 years ago.
Sure, yeah. I've had a pretty wide range of opportunities, I think, since I graduated. I've had the privilege of working on a more rural ambulance that was like a hybrid with a ER. I transitioned from that to the more urban emergency ambulance, frontline 911, and then backline transfers. More recently was working in a hospital, and then when I move, I'll be working in a hospital as well.
Okay, so you've been pretty continuously working as an EMT since you finished the
Yes,
class. Went
yes.
right into it
Mhm.
and stayed there for it. So, what did you want to talk to us about? So, you finished the class and you went right out into the field and you said, "Oh crap, I wish I would have known more about what to expect in what regard."
Yeah, I feel like I felt underprepared, and I also felt like I faced a lot of challenges I wasn't expecting. And I wanted to address those with peers and hopefully make them feel more prepared as they enter.
Yeah, and when you say underprepared, like you didn't know what to do when someone was having a medical emergency or
No, I felt competent as an EMT.
okay,
I
okay.
think more on the mental challenge of it and how you handle the task of being a provider in a stressful situation.
Okay. Sounds good. So tell us about some of the hurdles that you first experienced when you were a brand new EMT. What things did you face that were challenging?
I think one of the biggest initial hurdles was kind of like the hazing culture of EMS. Um, in one end, it makes sense. They want to put you in this like fishbowl of stress essentially to make sure that you can perform under a very high stress situation. And at the same time, at least where I was, there was a lot of negativity around it too, putting people down, trying to weed out the bad ones, I guess. And it was really stressful. And on one end, I'm grateful because it did turn me into the EMT I am today. But I also think if I had been supported different, it definitely wouldn't have been so hard on me. Like it was so stressful when I started that before my training shifts, I literally would throw up before I went in. It
Oh
was
no.
so bad, and I would have to like clench the steering wheel in my car and like hype myself up to some music.
And at that point, you were feeling like stressed about the hazing that was about to take place, or about going on calls, or everything.
It
Like, what
was
do you think
kind of
was?
everything.
Yeah.
Just like that call to perform and just it felt like so much pressure and I don't think I was totally ready for it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Just it was a lot.
It was a lot.
How did people that had been on the job for a long time? How did they respond to when you face stressful situations? Did they try to help you? Did they say, "Oh, I remember being new," or how did that go?
I had a mixed bag.
Okay.
So I have some that I'm absolutely still friends with. One of which he's been a paramedic for forever. But he's such a down to earth guy. He knows every single traffic accident that he was on. Like every cross, he knows which one is his. And he leaves flowers. He brings flowers to patients in the hospital. Like he is just one heck of a guy. And he's been nothing but supportive my entire journey. And I've had a couple people like that. And then I also had my negative experiences where I literally was told that I picked the wrong career and that I was never going to be successful. So it was kind of a mixed bag.
A little bit of everything.
Yeah.
A little bit of everything. Did you ever get to a point where you felt like okay, the stress is too much for me to handle on my own, and I should like probably try to seek help.
Yes.
And what was that like? Was it easy to just go talk to a therapist, or were
I
there
was
any
kind of,
barriers to
I
that?
was nervous. I think with how some of the comments that I'd received, um, I felt like almost like a failure that I was needing help so early on, which I quickly realized is totally not the case. Um, so I think it was more of a struggle feeling like I was letting down others by seeking help, um, which was not the case.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like got to take care of yourself first, right? We preach that in the in the class, but then when it's time, you feel like you're taken away from helping other people
Yeah.
to take care of yourself.
I really realized that it's kind of a corny saying, but if your cup is empty, you can't fill other people's. So trying to keep that balance in yourself too, that you need to be in the best place you can be to be the best provider for others.
Yeah, it's really important. Um, what about, did this have any impact on your life outside of work, your family and things like that?
Sure. It absolutely did. Um, my training was really brutal. It was 12-hour shifts. My last one was a 24-hour shift. During that time, I had a very newborn baby. My daughter was only like a month old. So that was tough too. But I kind of was in this little hermit crab hole where it was like work, sleep, work, sleep, work, sleep. Once I got out of it though, and I was now like my own person, I didn't have people watching over me. I definitely relaxed, and that's kind of where I feel like I took off and got that confirmation of, oh yeah, this is totally what I'm supposed to be doing. And then I obviously hit my hurdles where I was like, oh no, like I have PTSD,
Hmm.
um, and managing that. But I'm sure we'll get to that in a second. So
Yeah, yeah. That's so you know, tell us about your experiences that kind of led you to you feel like that you might have led you to have PTSD. I mean, you've told us like the job was stressful, there was the hazing culture, you know, kind of you're new on the job. Some coworkers were helpful, some not so much. Um, you don't have to. We definitely don't want to violate HIPAA or
sure,
anything. So, and you don't have to get into anything too gory. We won't do the tell us about your worst day on the job.
sure.
I won't do that to you. But if you want to tell us, if you want to kind of give us some information about what was it like, what drove you to feel like, okay, I have PTSD and I need to do something about it.
Sure, yeah. So I am what they call a shit magnet. Since my training with like even you doing my 12-hour ride, like just bad luck from the start, and it's totally continued. My last day at this past job was just another cluster disaster. Everyone was like, "Oh, this is your fault. It's your last day." So the universe had to come at us, and we just got completely destroyed. So I think that also was kind of hard. Is a lot of times, at least according to some of the people that were very supportive to me, said that they see these big bad things, but usually later on into their career are spread out. And I was kind of just tackled down right away with some really, really hard calls, personal hard calls, suicides, violence, my first CPR, just all right in the beginning. And because I think it was mixed with the fact I was still training and that was so stressful, and it was just, I think, the level of stress made it impossible to appropriately cope. And I think that contributed to the PTSD developing.
Okay. So the extra stress of the training on top of seeing the things on the calls and
Yes.
just all of that together. So how is PTSD affecting your daily life?
Sure. So it kind of started manifesting itself slowly. First, nightmares, which is a pretty classic experience
Symptom.
for a lot of people that have PTSD. I started to have baseline nightmares, and they weren't all about work, but most of them were about work.
Okay.
Maybe not specific calls, but just like stress dreams, which I do still get. Now I can kind of laugh them up because I realize, the situation is so utterly ridiculous. In my dream, like we're doing a CPR and they all want me to grab a pair of gloves that doesn't exist, and the dream feels really stressful. Um, so that was kind of my first manifestation. Um, second was I was doing a lot of on-call work at this time, so I wore a pager.
Okay.
And I started to hear like phantom tones and
Hmm.
phantom pager, so I would not be working. I'd be in my pajamas at Walmart, and someone's car alarm would go off, and I would just like get this like punch in my chest of like adrenaline, like, "Oh, I'm at work,"
Hmm.
and I wasn't.
Right.
You know, the nightmares and that. It was hard to cope with. And then of course, like you don't sleep because you've had a nightmare, and then you have to go to work. So
Hmm.
it was just kind of like this snowball.
Snowball effect.
Yeah,
Okay. So, to make it clear, you're moving out of state,
I am.
but you are going to keep working as
I
an
am.
EMT. So you're staying in
Yes.
the medical field. So you've been telling us about really a lot of bad stuff, but here
Sure.
you are still working
Yes.
as an EMT. So why are you still here? What do you like? What draws you to the career?
I have had a million times more positive experiences in my career than I've ever had negative. The interactions I've had with patients and families, I will never forget. Um, the funny times too. I love the EMT life of like you're just utterly bored and playing hacky sack in a garage, and then all of a sudden it's terrifying. Um,
Thrown right into it.
love it. I love the adrenaline. But the patient experience, I feel like I get to be the one good thing in someone's worst day of their life. And I feel like that makes it worth it to me.
Bounces out all the bad.
It does.
Okay. So you came in to want to talk to future students. So, we're making this podcast for people who are somewhere in the middle of an EMT class. What do you want them to know? What should they be doing right now to prepare themselves for what they probably don't know? It's pretty hard to know what to expect. So, what can they do to prepare themselves?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be totally impossible to prepare yourself for some of the things you're going to see. It's one of those things where you just kind of have to do it. You're not going to know until you do it how exactly you're going to respond. But there is some things that I wish I would have done, which is I think anyone who's preparing to go into the high stress medical field should just find a therapist. Just go start talking with them. Even if you go once a month and you talk about the fact you have nothing to talk about, at least when it comes to when you do start to really need it, if you need it, it's there.
You have somebody to talk to.
You're not
Yeah.
on a waiting list
Yeah.
to see a therapist, or, in crisis, you have no one. So being proactive with that.
Yeah.
I think second was a mantra or something that you can tell yourself starting now, in your just daily life. Just something you can tell yourself when you're feeling stressed that you can practice. That way, when it comes to these different kinds of stress you maybe have not experienced, you can apply it. Mine was, "This is not my emergency."
Yeah.
Especially as a mom with kids, and I love working in pediatrics. That's why I liked the hospital I worked for. To see a kid that's in the same pajamas as your kid or something like that, and just reminding
Same
yourself,
age. Yeah.
this is not my emergency. I have to be the best provider I can for this person, but this is not my child. This is not my situation.
Absolutely. When just going back to talking about finding a therapist, my recommendation for people too would be that if you are looking for a therapist and you know you're going to work as a first responder, you can find therapists who specialize
You
in first
can.
responder work.
Yes.
I was talking with Matt earlier today about what's it like to go home to your spouse, and how different is it that if your spouse also works in healthcare and you can tell them some crazy gory story and they're kind of like, wow, that's cool, and then ask, are you okay?
Right.
Versus sometimes you go home to a spouse and you start telling them a gory story and they're in the bathroom vomiting because of just hearing you talk about what they saw. So I would imagine therapists are pretty similar. They're probably going to be better at putting on a poker face, but if you find a therapist who specializes in first response and helping first responders, I would imagine, I don't have any firsthand experience, but I would imagine that they're going to be better able to kind of understand what you're going through. They probably have a lot of clients who do that kind of thing, and are going to be better prepared
Absolutely.
to help you.
I've had a couple different therapists. My first one, she moved away, of course. She was the perfect one. She was a combat medic in the army. So she knew the things. She had so many tricks for me to cope, and she really got me on my 2 feet again. I owe her so much. And I've had other therapists that are more standard therapists that I felt like at that point I was more equipped to just speak to
Hmm.
someone. I think it's also important when you are finding a therapist to, it's kind of like therapist shopping, right? You don't want, if you meet with someone and you're like, we're not a good fit, then just find somebody
Find somebody else.
else.
There are plenty of people out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. What things do you do besides like going to therapy? What other things have you found that help you manage your stress?
Sure. Definitely hobbies, things outside of work. I know a lot of my work friends have turned into old ladies and they all they knit and
Okay.
crochet and things like that. I've never picked that up. I'm definitely more of a video game person.
Okay.
Um, spending time with my kids, going outside, being active.
Those kind of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you found any like have you had to kind of modify your diet or like exercise or those kind of things that did that kind of stuff help you or
I haven't personally done very much of that. I think I've struggled actually to keep it's hard to actually have a pretty good diet when you're an EMT sometimes.
yeah, yeah,
um
the schedule alone is enough to make it
I
difficult.
think it's like a fast eating competition sometimes.
Mhm.
It's like how fast can you eat this food before the next tone goes out, but I do try to eat better on my non-work days.
Days. Yeah,
Yeah.
at least so that the days that you do have control over your diet,
Yeah, my work
try to do
days
better.
it's like it's a survival thing.
Yeah. If you get time to
Yeah.
eat, you're lucky. You eat what you can
I do
find
eat
and
like lots of sugary things usually when I'm on shifts. Things like, and I always keep a candy bar in my pocket because that's something you can chow down on the go.
real quick
So
and get some calories in.
sugar boost.
When you came in to talk to the current class, you also talked about a good thing is to kind of recognize that you're human and you do have human emotions because I
Hmm.
think you had said when you went into the career, you weren't really, you thought you were going to be tougher than everybody and it was not going to be a problem for you.
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
Yeah, and
Tell us more about that.
I think it was this expectation that like for some people that have been doing it longer, I felt like because I was struggling, I must have been less of a provider, which is not true.
Right.
It was really quick into that where I was speaking with my therapist, and she said, I would be really concerned if you weren't feeling this way. And one of the things that really tipped this all for me and was actually one of the reasons I came in to talk with you is I was speaking about one of my experiences with one of the physicians at the hospital I was working at, and he told me, he said, there are things that like I will never forget. He's like, and they don't get better, and that's okay because you're a human being. And if we are robotic and we get rid of our compassion and our feelings, we can't give the same care. So it's a delicate balance of you don't want to hurt yourself by, I don't know if caring too much is the wrong term, but getting too emotionally involved. But you also can't detach yourself completely. Being a human is how we take care of other humans. So,
Yeah, it's an important part of the job. And so, actually, related to that, something else you talked about to the class was the sometimes the importance of the role of just like how to effectively communicate with patients, but even like their family members.
yeah.
What's that like when there's a really bad something going on and you're kind of off to the side talking to the family?
Initially that kind of was intimidating for me. Um, it felt like it was a different ball game, right? It's a psychological ball game. It's not like the physical hands-on stuff. But I grew to really, really appreciate it going into the hospital setting, taking care of what I needed to, and then when the more advanced care would arrive and I got to step back and getting to sit with a family member and say, this is what's happening. And I don't want this to feel scary.
Mm-hmm.
Like this looks like chaos, but it's not. And getting to explain every part and just see them relax, I think is important because
Yeah.
it's like we're stopping trauma too. So like I've had my traumatic experiences, and I know, hey, if we take away some of that fear and unknown and confusion, it can give our patients' families um, better outlook as well. Because our families that are watching this happen are patients too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. They're part of our care for
they
sure.
are.
Um, let's see. So I think I have some other kind of off-topic
Sure.
questions that are pretty small, but I wanted to just first open it up. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about? I know one thing you talked about with the class was kind of that, why are we doing all this? It's like, well, because EMTs have a much higher rate of experiencing PTSD
Sure.
than the general population, which is not surprising. They have higher divorce rates. They have higher suicide rates, like almost double the normal population. So, um, did you have anything else to add to that, or just anything else that you were wanting to talk about, kind of related to PTSD and your experiences with
Sure.
having the problem, facing the problem, and then overcoming that?
Yeah, I think if you're an EMT that is starting your career with a family, I think family preparation is really important too. We did not prepare as a family at all.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, yep,
Mom's
mom's
got
going
a
to go
new
work on an
job.
ambulance. This is
Yeah.
going to be great. And I quickly realized there's some things we probably should have prepared for, which kind of like you spoke to earlier. My husband does not work in the medical field. He is quite squeamish, actually. And so, to an extent, I can talk to my husband about my stresses,
Mm-hmm.
but I also don't want to traumatize my husband.
Yeah.
And I don't want to put my stress onto him because it'll affect him.
Mm-hmm.
So, having that therapist is great because that is an external person that is not going to be, it's not going to affect our family. There's so many things I think preparing your family for, explaining to your kids how things work. Um, my son has autism, which was a pretty big challenge with being an on-call provider, which is why I've preferred hospital work. It's much more consistent for my son. That was really hard for him to be like, we drive 2 cars everywhere.
Because you might have to go to work
Yeah,
in the middle of
so
dinner. Or
I would be at the trampoline park, like in uniform but with a hoodie on because I didn't want anyone to think that I was going to help them if they broke their leg. And we'd be in 2 cars, and my pager would go off, and I'd leave.
Right. It's like, where'd mom go?
Where'd mom go?
Sudden
And it
change.
hurt my heart too because like he'd be crying and gripping onto my leg, and I don't have time to deal with this. I would have to kind of like
I
shove him
have to
off
leave,
and
yeah.
literally leave. So I feel like now he's older,
Mm-hmm.
it would probably be better. But having a young child, I think definitely there's things to discuss, and asking your therapist because they'll have good ideas for that as well.
Good. Anything else that you wanted to talk about that you can think of?
I don't know. I mean, I have lots of funny stories and things, but yeah, I think those are the big points is, recognizing that this stress is okay and your feelings are okay and it
Yeah.
doesn't make you less of a provider. I know one of the students in the class had asked me, like, because I am officially diagnosed with PTSD and I'm on medications, does that prevent me from getting a job? No.
Yeah. As long as you're managing
As long as I am
the.
able to handle the stress I'm under
Mm-hmm.
and I'm in an appropriate setting. So the only way it's prevented my work is I can't work night shift because I take all of my meds at nighttime. So they make me an unsafe driver. So it's little things like that. A lot of medications don't make you tired and it doesn't matter. But yeah, as long as you're able to do the work and you're a reliable person, it's okay. It is against the law for them to
To
discriminate against you because
Yeah.
you have PTSD.
Yeah, absolutely. So another thing that the students asked you a lot about was you're in a unique position that you had how many years on an ambulance?
I had 3,
3 on an ambulance,
Yes.
and then how many in a emergency room as a tech?
2.5. I was
Yeah.
working both places while
For
I
a
was on
little
a truck
bit.
for a little bit. Yeah.
So like almost 3 years of experience in both. So that puts you
Mhm.
in a unique position because a lot of people taking the class are trying to figure out, okay, when I finish, what am I going to do?
Sure.
So kind of give us a summary of your experiences and like what things were pros and cons of the 2 different jobs. And of course, every ambulance service is going to be different. Every hospital is going to be different. So we'll try to stay within like the general
Yeah.
general things that are, it's like you might have really good coworkers at one ambulance service and
Right.
really bad one at another,
It's true.
something like that. So we'll try not to nitpick any small things, but just
Yeah.
in general, kind of what are the big differences between working those jobs?
I think one of the bigger benefits of being an EMT is largely by my experience, it's a pretty flexible schedule. Most places you're working 12-hour shifts most of the time, with the exception of the job I'm moving to. That one's a 9-hour shift, more like clinic setting. But for the most part, it's 12-hour shifts, up to 24s or 72s, whatever you're doing. But for the most part, you get to pick. So when I worked at the hospital, there was 2 other EMTs. We would sit down together and decide, all right, which day do you want to work? What day do you want to work? And similar on the ambulance too. You put in your bid for how many hours, select which shifts you feel like you're available. They usually schedule you. That might be different for other places, but that was my experience here. I think the like pros and cons comes down to pay, benefits, and kind of what you're needing in your support work life. At the hospital, I found that I had better pay and better benefits long term, and because I have a family and I want to retire, that was a better plan for me personally. On the flip side, I feel like every EMT should have some kind of ambulance experience. I think it really teaches you how to be a provider on your own.
Because you're on your own.
You're totally on your own.
You have a partner, but
you're on your own.
But you're on your own.
Yeah. The hospital is funny because I do see the same things, but the stress level is totally different.
Because you have all this help.
Yeah, it's
and all
like,
these resources.
This guy isn't breathing. Call the respiratory team, and people show up. So like you are doing the EMT job, but usually for a lot shorter periods. Unlike we're on the ambulance where you're like crawling behind somebody's house and help's not coming for another 12 minutes. So,
which feels like 12 hours.
Yeah, I think even if you only did ambulance for a month, I think it's a good experience to try.
To get that experience in there. So you felt like you got more experience on the ambulance in some ways, but more steady work-life balance in the hospital.
Yeah, I think also the hospital did allow me to grow my scope of practice. On the ambulance as an EMT, when things go really south, unless you're a BLS only truck, you end up driving a lot of times. Out of state, sometimes they hire just drivers, and then that's a different experience. But at least here, it was just a paramedic and an EMT. When things got really bad,
you're driving.
I'm driving.
So you don't really get to even see what's going on.
Right. But in the hospital, my scope was bigger. I also got to... because I was working under a physician, I was able to do other skills that are not used on an ambulance. So in the hospital setting, I was getting to do IVs, ultrasound IVs, where we would use ultrasound guidance to actually put in larger lines. I would help with like suture removals and fun things like that. So my scope was different in those 2 locations. And I did enjoy getting to like really push my mind and have to work hard to do these other things. So that was another positive for me.
Positive. Okay. Matt, do you have anything that you can think of that we should ask or anything to add? Okay. Anything else?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I'm really grateful that you invited me.
I'm grateful for you coming in. I think that, like I said, when you came in and did your presentation for the class, halfway through it, I was like, I can't wait to have her in every time. And then
I know,
my heart
crushed
got
your
so
heart.
broken.
I really appreciated the student questions.
Yeah.
I was kind of worried I was going to get like crickets.
Yeah.
But they asked great questions.
Did we spend an hour, I think?
Yeah.
Asking and answering questions.
Which was wonderful.
And I should have written down some of those questions to ask you today.
It's okay.
But yeah. All right. Well, thanks for coming in.
Of course.
It was good, safe travels to your new destination.
Absolutely. Whenever I visit, I'll let you know.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.